Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on assessing writing online. I see that we have people signing up, telling us where they're from. I see people from Indonesia, Brazil, Italy.
Yes.
What else have we?
I would say the same. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, where you are. And please tell us where you come from, because it's nice to see which parts of the world we are reaching and places we would love to go to.
Well, definitely. I saw someone from the Maldives joined us. I see Oman, Lithuania, Cancun, Tijuana. Cancun. Wouldn't we all love to be in Cancun
Yeah.
right now, Alberto?
Yeah. Wouldn't we?
Bangkok, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Peru, Colombia, Cambodia, more people from Mexico, quite a few from the Philippines, Nepal. Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Morocco, Egypt. Someone sent you a special hello, Alberto. You have fans in the audience.
All right. I didn't see that. That was too quick. But thank you very much, everyone, for being here with us today. This is our second version of this very same webinar this week, right, Pablo?
Absolutely. And well, second time is always better. So we've had experience. We made all the mistakes in the previous one, and now you guys are going to get the good one.
So we hope.
So we hope. Lots of people from Ecuador, Argentina, Brazil, quite a few, Uruguay, India, Algeria, wow, Pakistan again, Thailand, Turkey, the US, someone is logging in from New Jersey. Everyone, I hope you're staying safe. We hope that everything is going well wherever you are. And I see some people are joining us just now. So let's give them a minute and then we can start.
Do you want to start with the housekeeping while they are joining in, Pablo?
Absolutely. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar about assessing writing online. My name is Pablo Toledo. I'm the Assessment Services Manager for the Southern Cone and Andes region in the Americas. And with me today is Alberto.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alberto Costa. I'm the Senior Assessment Manager for the Americas. I work with Pablo, which is a great honor. And I also work with other counterparts in other parts of America. And it's an honor to be here talking to you again. And thank you very much for your participation.
Due to the current climate, we are delivering this webinar to you today in a slightly different way. Like most of you, we are working from home, but we are aiming to give you the best experience that we can. We are relying on home Wi-Fi, so please bear with us if we have any issues. We do have a recording of the webinar, which we will share if we do experience any problems. Before we start, here are a few suggestions to help you get the most out of today's session. We recommend headphones to get better quality audio and to hear better. Try not to have anything else running, especially things like Skype, Netflix, YouTube, etc. Switch off any other programs that you've got running in your computer if you can. Try not to have, don't worry if the picture is a bit blurry at first. That is the live streaming. It should hopefully improve soon. During the webinar, you will need to be able to use the chat box that is on the right of your screen. You can find the handout in this area. Please use this chat box if you want to type any comments or questions. If it is something that we can answer straight away, we will type an answer to you directly. We will keep some questions for the question and answer session at the end. So don't worry if your question isn't answered straight away. And we will ask you to use this chat box for activities and polls during the session. So please keep an eye on it. So let's get started.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, where you are. So we're going to start this webinar on assessing writing online. And we have here an idea, a general overview of what we're going to cover today, right? So we're going to start with a recap on assessing writing skills. Then we're going to talk about real-life writing and validity. We'll also talk about different ways of assessing writing online, and then ways of developing and assessing writing, and of course, ways of giving feedback online, right? We'll also talk about some resources that we have available, which are aimed at supporting every teacher. So welcome to this webinar, and many thanks for attending, for participating here, okay? So the reason why we're going to start with this recap on assessing writing skills, it's because before we consider assessing writing online, we need to go back a few steps and review what assessing writing is all about. So we need to make sure we know what to assess and how to assess writing so that we can do it online, right? We are going to talk about some tools to help you do the assessment online in a minute. But we're going to start by asking for you to participate in the chat. So I have here a first question for you. When we're talking about assessing writing, there are some challenges for us teachers, right? So, what are some of the challenges that we teachers face when assessing learners' writing? So, here, this is one challenge that Pablo and I have. It's knowing what to concentrate on, knowing what to focus on. This is one of the challenges we came across. What are your challenges? Can you type your ideas in the chat? We would like to hear from you, and it's good when you share your experiences with us as well. So, what are some of the challenges that we face when we are assessing learners' writing? I can see some of you mentioning syntax, copy and pasting, that is plagiarism. We are going to mention this at some point during the webinar. I can see here punctuation, cohesion, format, grammatical error. Yes, that's a big challenge. Pablo, did you spot anything else?
There was a question here about content, which is a very important thing to consider when you're assessing. I mean, we ask our students to do a task. Are we really focused on how they write something or what they're actually saying? The time that it requires to assess something, and which is definitely something we will consider, as well as another theme that came up, which is how to deliver feedback that is rich and meaningful.
Mm-hmm. It seems that copy and pasting is a recurrent issue as well here in the chat room. So we started off by mentioning one of the challenges that we hear from teachers that we also have is, what do we need to concentrate on when we assess learners' writing? But there are other challenges as well. For example, we have knowing what to concentrate on when making an assessment, as I mentioned, giving meaningful and motivating feedback to the learner, knowing how much correction to give the learners. Pablo read it in the chat box that feedback is something that is a challenge. So how much correction should we give the learner? Also, encouraging learners to peer or self-assess their writing. This is something that is connected with, for example, this habit of copy and pasting and plagiarism. So how can we discourage plagiarism and encourage more reflective thinking on learners' own writing? And then also criteria, using clear descriptors to assess writing. So, for example, if you are discussing this piece of writing with a colleague in the teacher's room, do you agree that that learner is doing well, or do you have different views? So how can we even this out? And I think having very clear descriptors is a good way of helping us assess writing and somehow come up with similar views about one piece of writing, right? So those challenges that I mentioned here, they are challenges from one angle of assessing writing, which is how teachers can deal with assessing writing for their learners, right? But we are now going to change the angle a little bit and consider other challenges from different perspectives. So when we set tasks for learners, are we measuring skills that are relevant to real life language use? So do the tasks that we give them allow for them to produce this kind of language? So I'm going to ask Pablo to talk about this.
Yeah, and to begin, perhaps it's useful to look at an example that is not about writing, but about speaking. If we ask our students to do the following task, the task that you're looking at on your screens right now, as a speaking activity where they have to read a text out loud, are we measuring skills that are relevant to real life language speaking in this particular context? It is true that when we speak, one of the things that we have to do, and probably one of the first things that matter, is that we have to say something that other people can actually understand, that we produce sounds which are understandable and which somehow phonetically work. But would this actually test speaking skills? So if we think in terms of what speaking actually means and we focus on speaking as communication, this is just a small part of it. And we would probably not use a task like this to test someone's speaking ability. Now, let's look at this other activity in which we are looking at writing now, or are we? If we ask our students to complete this letter by filling in the gaps, are we actually testing writing? Well, you definitely recognize this kind of open-close exercise as something that you would see in a use of English test, and this is actually more focused on verbs. Do you have to use verbs correctly to be understood in your writing? Definitely. Are we looking at a text that we would expect our students at a certain level to be able to write? Absolutely. Now, is this measuring skills that are relevant to real life language use? Part of them, not all of them. Which brings us to the question then of what makes writing good. So we are going in about a minute, we are going to put a poll to the right of your screen. And the question is, what makes writing good? Is writing good if the reader understands the message? Is writing good when it has good spelling, correct grammar, and clear punctuation? Is writing good when there is a clear connection of ideas? Is writing good when the register, how formal or informal a text is, and the tone of the language are appropriate? Or is it all of the above? So there is a poll now on the side of your screen. Please click your answer and let's see what you think. Is it that the reader understands the message, good spelling, grammar, and punctuation, clear connection of ideas, register and appropriacy, or all of the above? Well, I think we have a clear winner. So far, over 80% of you have voted for all of the above. Understanding the message has some fans. Clear connection of ideas is picking up a bit. But Alberto, I would say that we have a winner.
Yes, and I think the ones who voted all of the above are right, because good writing has all of those elements, Pablo.
Why
And
choose?
yes, yes. So you need to consider all of those things. And then when we're talking about assessment, it's a lot of things to consider, right? And especially when we think that writing is a real life skill. And as a real life skill, writing has specific characteristics. So every time we write a message, or maybe we text a message to someone, there are three things that we have in mind automatically: what we are going to say, how we are going to say it, and the effect our message will have on the reader, right? So if those three main things happens in real life writing, we need to consider that when we set tasks to learners, we need to make sure they bear those things in mind, having a target reader in mind, being aware of the kind of effect their writing will have on the target reader, and most of all, what they are going to say. So we go back to Pablo's question again. Are we measuring skills that are relevant to real life language use? One way of making sure that we will be measuring those skills is by setting them a task that will allow them to use those skills, right? So here is a sample writing task, and this writing task is one that I chose at level A2 in the CEFR, or the Common European Framework of Reference, which is an international reference for language levels and skills and competencies, right? So the CEFR has focuses on skills, and looking at the written production scale from the Common European Framework at level A2, here is a descriptor that they say that at level A2, a writer should be able to do those things. So at level A2, a writer should be able to write very short, basic description of events, past activities, and personal experiences, right? Which means that when we look at a task that we see in our course books or maybe in mock exams, and here is a task that I got from one of our platforms that help learners develop writing skills. The platform is called Write and Improve. This is a task that I got from Write and Improve at level A2. Let's look at this task and see if it has those elements. Well, as a task that we can set to learners, this task has a context. So here there is a birthday party that happened yesterday as part of the context. There is a target reader. In this case, the target reader is Leila, probably a friend. And then it has a topic. There was a party, the context, but you couldn't go. That's the topic. And then it also has a very clear text type. You have to write a short note to Leila, right? And it has the purpose, the thing that you are going to communicate to her. And it also has the word count, which means that when we're talking about a note as a text type, it's not something that will have loads and loads and loads of paragraphs. So this task has a number of elements that can help learners show that they have what to write, what they're going to say, how they're going to say it, and having the right effect on the target reader.
Absolutely. And validity is definitely the first pillar of assessment of language, or basically assessment of anything in education. The second part, however, something that also has to be there, is what we call reliability. And reliability can be summarized in basically two questions. Number one, how can we make sure that we measure all writing by the same standard? When we assess the different learners in our class, maybe we have 20, 30, 15, 10, 60, however many, how can we make sure that when we look at two learners which are at the same level, we are giving them the same score, and that when we have someone who is higher up or a little bit further down the ladder, we are giving them scores that actually reflect their competence and which are meaningful and which are basically fair? The second part of that question is, how can we make sure that we are using the same standard as other teachers? How can we make sure that if I look at a piece of writing, and Alberto, who is working with me in the same institution, teaching the same level, looks at the same piece of writing, that we are going to give it the same score, that we are going to assess it using the same standards, and that we are going to apply them in the same way? This is a big issue. This is a big challenge. Now, what things can help us here? How can we do it right? First, we need to define what we want to assess, what things we are going to focus on, how we are going to weigh them, how we are going to describe and explain them. One way of doing that is using the Common European Framework of Reference, the CEFR. And the CEFR, as Alberto showed you a minute ago, is based on descriptors. If you look at these descriptors, you have a breakdown of different skills, in this case writing, at different levels, and the different components that make it up, what we can expect. So if you choose an approach like this, it can definitely help you be more reliable in your assessment, because you will know what to look at. The second part of that is to select or design a task. So if you're looking at a level B1 in the Common European Framework, for instance, an email requesting information is definitely appropriate because it matches the descriptors for that level. At B2, argumentative argumentative writing and argumentative discourse begins to show up a lot more in the descriptors, the capacity to do a for and against, to sustain your views, to compare. So an opinion article becomes much, much more relevant. If you look at C1, the level above, then at that advanced level, definitely something like an essay evaluating abstract ideas is a proper measure of the kind of competencies that you expect to see at that level. So selecting or choosing the right task goes a long way towards being more reliable in our assessment. And then we need to do a final check. We need to look at the task instructions, if they're clear, if they include all the information our doctor was mentioning earlier, if the time available and the number of words are there, and the explicit assessment criteria, what our students know about how the way they will be evaluated. How do we do it at Cambridge? At Cambridge, we have a criteria for assessing writing that is detailed in lots of documents, and you will find references to that in the handout to this session. And the criteria is basically has two components, has four parts. One is content, the other is communicative achievement, the other is organization, and the other is language. Those are the four assessment criteria for writing. What do they mean? Content focuses on how well the candidate has completed the task. If they were asked to write a letter asking A and B and then making a suggestion about C, has that been done? Communicative achievement focuses on how appropriate the writing is for the task. Is the register, is the tone right for a letter? Organization, how the candidate puts together the piece of writing. Are the ideas joined up? Is the structure correct? Is it easy to follow the thought or the ideas that the writer wants to communicate? And finally, language, the vocabulary and grammar. If it is not correct to a certain degree, then it will not be understandable. Is the language right? And then that brings us into our next section.
Fantastic, Pablo. I would just like to do a really quick recap, because we started off talking about challenges from the point of view of the teachers assessing writing, then challenges in terms of setting tasks to learners. We talked about validity, and then we talked about reliability just now and criteria. And then we are going to talk about different ways of assessing, and we have a challenging question here. How do you provide writing feedback that is formative and informative? I think, Pablo, this is a question for you.
I don't have all the answers for that, but probably you do in the audience. We have about 3,000 people joining us, which is a privilege, and we appreciate your time being with us. So please type your answers in the questions. But while you do that, whenever we talk about assessment, we need to remember that there are different ways of assessing. So let's see if I can move. Okay, now if you look at these two photographs, we are looking at two different pairs of people, and they are assessing food. They are looking at food and they are judging the food. But are they assessing the same things? On the top, you see two people eating at a restaurant. At the bottom, you see the cooks of that restaurant tasting the food and judging it while they're cooking it. So are they assessing the same things? Are they assessing them in the same way? Now, what is relevant and what is not for each of them? Is it the same in both cases? And how do they decide what is relevant or irrelevant to each of them? What is good or bad in each case? What is desirable and undesirable? This is a question that we teachers think about a lot, because basically we are looking at the two poles of the assessment spectrum. What are our chefs doing? What are the cooks doing? What they're doing is what we call formative assessment. They are looking at the food while it is being cooked. They are tasting it, but what they are doing is judging the process of the cooking while they are cooking. They are focused on the product. They're focused on what is the actual dish going to look like. But right now, what they are thinking of is how is the process of cooking going? And what steps have we done right? What can we correct? What do we need to change? What corrective measures do we need to implement? Maybe a bit more salt. Maybe we need to put it back in the oven a little bit more. Whatever. At the other end of scale, we have the people at the table, and what they are doing is summative assessment. They have a plate in front of them. They are eating the final product. They are tasting the final product, and it doesn't really matter. And there is no time to put it back in the oven because they're thinking of a product. They're thinking of the end of the process and what has come out of that. And these are the two classic functions of assessment. I like to think of them more as orientations of assessment and not a choice. It's not that we are doing formative or summative. We can do things which are definitely in between, and we can use one a little bit more like the other. This is a subject for a much longer conversation. There are definitely webinars in Cambridge English TV on YouTube where you can learn a lot about this, a lot more about this. But basically, when and why do we do each of these? The cooks are thinking, let's cook better so that the people at the front of a restaurant will like it. The people eating the food are thinking, we like what they have cooked. And this brings us to these two orientations. Because formative assessment, what the cooks are doing, promotes an improvement of learning. In this case, promotes an improvement of the cooking process. But when we are doing formative assessment, we are thinking of the learning process and looking forward into that process. How can we make it better? Summative assessment, what the people eating the food are doing is measuring the learning that has already happened. It is looking back and saying, we were supposed to achieve this, this, and this. Has that been achieved? Yes, no, to what degree? But actually, they are working together in a cycle, because the way it works is, while you are teaching, you are doing formative assessment pretty much every minute of your teaching. And then you reach a certain milestone, a certain point in which you do some kind of summative assessment. And that summative assessment is going to give you feedback that you are going to implement in your teaching as you continue teaching. So it is looking back, but in a way, as it integrates with formative assessment and the planning of your teaching, it is looking forward as well. And they definitely work together in a cycle. It's never the learning never ends. It's always looping and coming back and starting again and pausing and starting again. So summative and formative definitely combine in this way. So how do you provide writing feedback that is formative and informative was our question. Alberto, what are some of the ideas that came up?
Some people highlighted here, Pablo, things like formative assessment, assessment for learning, summative assessment of learning. I thought it was a good point that they mentioned here. They
Absolutely.
kept asking a number of questions like mechanics, for example. Why is that not in the criteria, even though we believe that mechanics are in the criteria? And then we can talk more about it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. At the end of the day, whatever is in the criteria, or whatever you think in terms of formative or summative, there needs to be a text that is well produced. So all of the things that we are doing are about how do we write well. If the writing has an issue, then we have a problem. Now, feedback is basically the outcome of any assessment task. We look at production that our students have done, and then we assess it, and then we give them feedback. That feedback needs to be formative. It needs to orient the learning process, and it needs to be informative. It needs to have enough information. And this brings us back to this formative summative. So what we provide feedback for, there are basically three things that we would like you to remember from this part. First, we provide feedback to make learners aware of their own strengths and weaknesses in relation to the standards required in the exam. If they have if they have acquired the skills that were expected, if they know what they're supposed to learn at that particular stage in their learning, or if they need, and what are they particularly good at, what they are not so good at. Then to inform the teacher of areas for development and or revision, this is where assessment goes into the next planning, and then to encourage critical self-awareness in the learners. They know their strengths and weaknesses, and this is teaching them how to assess their own production. At the end of the day, teaching is this fantastic profession where we work to make ourselves irrelevant. We train our learners so that they will not need a teacher by their side in the future. Which brings us to how do we actually do this in class? How do we develop and assess writing, Alberto?
Very good, Pablo. Your analogy of the cooks and the clients in the restaurant, they are it was a very popular analogy. Everyone said it was a great analogy, very clear explanation. So we are now going to talk about how we put those things together, and then we combine formative and summative assessment in the classroom, right? What are the different ways of developing and assessing writing? So in terms of assessing writing, this is a summative type of task. That is a kind of task that you find either in an exam or maybe at a final task at the end of a unit in the course book. So the way it is here, this task aims to assess something, right? This is why it is summative. This very task was taken from one of our mock exams, the Key4 Schools exam, already in the new version for 2020. And the purpose of this task is to assess whether or not the learners are able to write very short, basic descriptions of events, past activities, and personal experiences. We saw one type of task at the beginning. This is another type of task. So in order for the teacher to assess whether the learner can write very short basic descriptions of events, etc., it's important to remember that there are lots of steps before assessing this, which means for the learner to be ready to write basic descriptions of events, they need knowledge. They need knowledge, for example, of contextual vocabulary and how to spell the words. They also need knowledge of adjectives, and this includes possessive adjectives and their position in a sentence. They need knowledge of some simple verbs at level A2. Those simple verbs include verb to be and to have in the past tense. They need knowledge of how to sequence the events and how to link the events using basic connectors like and, but, because. And they need knowledge as well of organization. They need basic text organization skills. For example, how to put those things into a paragraph that makes sense, right? So before we are ready to assess whether the learners can write this and that at level A2, we need to make sure that we build all this knowledge and that we give feedback while building this knowledge. Formative assessment, right? So here is the task that I showed you before. So as I said, I showed a model for summative purposes, but now you want to help your students to write a good story, and then you suggest this task. One of the ways that we can do is to adopt an approach to writing which we call process writing, right? Process writing is an approach to teaching writing that allows the teacher and the students to go through the process of producing a text together. Here is the link to a blog post which explains process writing very, very clearly, and it's a very good and quick read. So process writing has 3 key stages: pre-writing phase, writing or revising phase, and the editing phase, right? In each of the phases, there are some specific tasks that you can do with learners. For example, in the pre-writing phase, you can encourage brainstorming of ideas. You can start helping the learners to plan what they are going to write and to organize and select their ideas. especially after the brainstorming. And then we have another phase, which is writing and revising. And this is the phase where learners can get feedback from the teacher in terms of their initial thoughts and then drafts. And then the learners can exchange drafts with each other and then reorganize the ideas together. Then they can add or change or remove parts of the text, as well as change words and expressions, right? And then we have the editing phase where learners and the teacher can check punctuation and spelling, then they can check grammatical inaccuracies and proofreading, so that the learners are ready to go to the summative assessment, which is publishing the final version. This is very important because in real life, and then we can talk about ourselves as teachers when we take courses, we do post-graduation courses. Every time we write a dissertation, for example, it's something that you start producing long before you are ready to submit the final version, and then you discuss this with your tutor. It comes and goes many times, right? And when we look at those three phases, writing, revising, editing, before publishing the final version, this is where formative assessment actually happens. This is where the teacher will be giving feedback to learners, and then the learners will have another opportunity to redraft their writing until they are ready to send the final version. Okay, so if we consider this specific task, we are going to now look at it from the perspective of the teachers teaching the learners how to write a short story, and we're going to go through the stages of process writing. So in the pre-writing phase for this specific task, there could be brainstorming of ideas. For example, for those pictures, picnic food, weather, relationship, outdoor activities, and then they could start planning and organizing their ideas, like the series of events, and then they can sequence the events, and then they can select the ideas, decide what to leave out, what to include. And in the writing or revising phase, they could sequence the ideas and then check the language. Then they could exchange drafts with each other and then do pair or group writing or circle writing. But then we are going to see how we can adapt this stage to remote teaching, which many of us are doing at the moment. And then reorganizing ideas by adding or changing or removing parts of the text, looking at language, changing words and expressions. And then we have the editing phase when you check punctuation and spelling. So many of you mentioned mechanics here in the chat. Well, mechanics are part of the process here. Then you can check grammatical inaccuracies and do proofreading, so that you can finally redraft the text with peer editing until you come up to a final, or what you would consider a final draft, right? Now, those phases, writing, revising, and editing, is also crucial for us teachers to develop in the learners this responsibility for being more autonomous, and also understanding that writing is something that you start with a draft and you don't just copy and paste. Writing is something that you build. You start with a draft, you get feedback, and when you give the learner this opportunity to draft and redraft, you are going to train them to avoid copy and pasting and dealing with plagiarism, etc., which is something that we don't want them to do. Okay? Now, because many teachers around the world are doing remote teaching, we might not be able to do writing as we do in the classroom with pair and group work writing or circle writing. However, nowadays there are many platforms that allow us to do it remotely. For example, Google Docs is something that can help learners to build a text together, and then they can revise the text, they can construct it together, and then they can do peer editing, they can make use of the spell check, for example, and then the teacher can also participate in the collaboration, in the construction of the text, and everyone can do that remotely in a way that is synchronous. Or you might wish to use something that is not synchronous, and we're going to be talking about this later. Okay, so there are ways of adapting those phases that we do in the classroom, and we can do them remotely nowadays. But during this process as well, during the stages of process writing, we cannot forget that we need to use criteria to give learners feedback throughout the process, right? So when we look at criteria, Pablo mentioned the 4 points in the criteria. In process writing, we can look at those definitions of the points and we can turn them into questions. So every time we give learners feedback, we use those questions and say, content. Have the learners done what they were asked to do? And your feedback will be given around that. Communicative achievement. Is it formal, informal, or is it appropriate? Organization. Is the story in a logical order? I'm saying story because the task that I mentioned here was a story. How about language? Is there a range of structures and lexes? Is the language accurate? So these are questions that you can ask while you are giving learners feedback throughout the process in process writing. And you can also adapt this task for meeting, if you wish to meet specific needs. We know that in some cases, learners might be struggling with putting a text together, putting a short paragraph together. So here are some ideas that you can do to encourage learners in this process and turn writing into stages, right? So for example, using the same set of pictures, you can give them the chance to brainstorm words or short phrases or sentences about what they can see in the pictures. This would be a way to help them generate ideas. Or you can provide a model, and then together with the model, with the sample writing, you can give them what we call a frame. So you can give them a short gapped text, and they would be adding to the gaps and personalizing this text, so which is a way of helping the learners to understand how to put a paragraph together. So you can scaffold their learning at this point. Another thing you can do is you can give them a model, and then they have to write a text based on the model, but making the information personal. In other words, personalizing the idea. So it's a different way of grading the level of challenge in the task. A fourth suggestion that you have is to use the task as it is if you are sure your learners will be able to demonstrate that they are able to write a short story, short descriptions, etc., sequencing events using the verbs in the past, referring back to the descriptor from the CEFR that I mentioned earlier, right? So then, while we are doing this, and many of us are teaching remotely, how can we give them feedback throughout the process and doing so online? And then Pablo will step in with some options here.
Absolutely, because in a way, the way we regularly assess writing is there are activities that we do in the class as part of the drafting or during writing stages of writing, which we do sort of face-to-face synchronous at the same time with our learners live. But a lot of the assessment that we do of writing actually happens outside of the classroom at home. We take a stack of paper or we receive things, and then we grade them at home or in our office if we are lucky, and then give it out to our students next week, next class, sometime later. Now, as we move to online teaching, there are a lot of teachers that are finding that it takes more time and that it's suddenly become more complicated, or not. But there are definitely ways in which we can give feedback online which are richer and easier to do. Let me share some of them with you. One of them is how to do proper proofing if you're using a text editor, if you're using a document editor, software like Word or Google Docs or OpenOffice Write. So I'm going to show you how to do it in Word, but the tools that I'm going to show you are common to all text editing software. So, and basically it's going to be about how to track changes to make proofing, to make our feedback more efficient. So I have prepared a very simple writing task, as you can see below. It is an extremely simple email or memo or text or letter, postcard maybe, and it's got a couple of errors. So I have received this from one of my learners, and now I want to give it feedback. How do I do it? First of all, in Word, I go to the Review ribbon, look at the Track Changes button, and make sure that Track Changes is enabled. I know a lot of you out there are doing color coding and then writing long feedback at the end of a text. I'm going to show you a different way to do this. That is going to be just as rich. It's going to take a lot less time to do. If you do that, you can produce a text like what you are looking at on screen. And what is it that you're looking at? First and foremost, I would like you to notice how at the bottom, I have pasted a table that I prepared earlier, and I just pasted the template for that, and I filled in the details, in which I already included my Cambridge assessment criteria for writing, content, communicative achievement, organization, and language. And then I wrote my comments based on that. And I even, because this is an exam preparation class, I included a band, which is the same way that the exams are assessed. Maybe you don't want to use this criteria only, or this criteria exactly as it is, but definitely having a template and putting it there is going to orient your feedback, and is going to make sure that you run through all of the areas that you provide meaningful feedback for each of them, and that you do it in less time. The other thing you're looking at is that because I corrected the text using the proofing tool, the Track Changes, you can see different kinds of notes. These things which are underlined in red that you can see here are things that I added because there were words which were missing in the original text, and I just included them. Then you can look at when my learner wrote "I will" to prepare, I just deleted the word "to," and you can still see it, but crossed out. So the learners know that there was something there, that I corrected it. The same thing with the spelling of favorite, which had a couple of letters missing. And finally, I wrote comments on the side. And these comments are things that have to do specifically with what they're doing. In the first comment, I am suggesting going back to a previous unit and doing some revision. In the second one, I am including a link to an online activity that they can do to develop that. This is a lot richer than the kind of feedback that you can do on pen and paper. Maybe you can attach, you can suggest go to page 26 of the book or do more activities on that. But here you can actually link to them, you can actually include them in your feedback, and it takes very, very little time to do. But you can take even less time to do this. What if you do your feedback as audio? What if instead of typing something up, you simply read the text and then you record a message, maybe 30 seconds, 1 minute, as long as you need, and just tell your student, look, this was better because of this and that, you need to work on this and that, and this complements the feedback that you give them on the page. And then you send them to them, you send it to your learners as a WhatsApp message, as an attachment to an email, or in a website like VoiceSpice or Vocaroo or any of the many that offer this service. You just record a text. You just record your feedback, send it to them, and they can hear it, which is also a nice little bit of listening comprehension practice. But you can do even better. You can record your own video feedback with a tool like Loom. And by the way, don't worry, all of this will be in your handout as a link. With a tool like Loom, you can put your student writing up on the screen, and then you can record yourself with the webcam in your computer. You can record yourself and the screen, and your students will see something like what you're looking at right now. So they can see you, they can see the text or whatever you have on your screen going at the moment. Then they can play it just like a YouTube video, and then you send them a link that they look at. This is very rich feedback. They have the text, they have your voice, they have your face, and then you can do any annotations on the screen and they will see it. It takes very little time to do. You just click record, you start speaking, you start marking things on the screen. It probably takes less time than writing one of these long paragraphs that we sometimes write at the end of text. And it looks very cool. It is so great. And it is definitely something that we can do online. If you don't want to show your face, if you're a little bit more shy, Jing, there are many screen grabbing tools online. Here is a link to another one of them where they can see your screen, but they cannot see you. That is if you don't want to put your face on it because it feels a bit too involved. Now, but the best way to actually give your students feedback online, the way that is going to take less time, is if you don't do any of the correction at all. Now, Alberto, is this magic possible?
Absolutely, Pablo. Well, one of the things that you can use as well, and most of it is for free, is going to Write and Improve, which is a platform that was developed by Cambridge Assessment English and a team of artificial intelligence experts. And this platform allows learners to submit their writing tasks, and then they get immediate feedback on their writing. So by going to Write and Improve, they can, for example, practice writing English. There are many tasks. For example, the free area for learners has over 200 tasks at different levels. And then they get their grades in seconds from the platform. They can look at the feedback, and then they can make changes, and then they submit a new draft, and then they get more feedback from the platform. So it's a free tool for learners, and it's really, really useful. Just to give you an idea, this is the interface of Write and Improve. And when learners go to the platform, they see a number of writing tasks and different levels on the left. So you have a menu, you have tasks at advanced level, intermediate level, beginner level. They choose one task and then they write their text, and the platform will give immediate feedback with pointing out areas that they need to correct, or the highlighting areas that need restructuring or rewriting. Then on the left, they edit their work, and then they submit it again, and then they get more feedback from the platform, and it keeps going on and on at different levels. And this area for learners is free. And Write and Improve also has an area for teachers to help teachers create classes, groups of learners, and monitor their writing as they develop. This is called Class View. And Class View is not a free area, but at the moment it's free for 2 months. So through Class View, you can make writing practice simple. You can set writing tasks for learners, then you receive their work, which is already marked by the platform, and then you can add more feedback, and you can even add your own grade to the task, and then you get task, learner, and class reports. And you can save time and watch your learners improve. And you can also, Pablo mentioned track changes in Word. Write and Improve has an area which shows what learners edited in their text, so that you can see from the very beginning of their development up to the moment when they submitted the last draft of their writing task. So it's a really, really useful platform, right? I can see that you are very positive about the comments related to this webinar. We would like to hear more from you. So can you please take our survey here? This is the first link. And then you can give feedback on this webinar and how much you have been learning. And we hope to be sharing good ideas with you. You can also sign up for user testing research with Cambridge English, and then you can participate in some of the research, right? So for the time being, we still have some more things to tell you, right? But it's time for us to consider answering some of the questions that you have posted here. So there were many questions, and I think we can get started by going back, Pablo, to mechanics. I think
Absolutely.
we could include mechanics in the area of checking language, right? We are talking about written language, and mechanic is in that area.
Yes, and this is interesting because a lot of the work that you do on the actual mechanics of writing, what goes into the language assessment criteria, is done as the final stage of the writing process. So putting a focus there on how to work with proofreading in our students, how to make them aware of what good writing looks and feels like, what good grammar and a good use of vocabulary looks and feels like, is crucial. So a lot of writing work is actually developing reading skills and developing the critical awareness of language that you can then implement to work on your own language. I think we often think of writing as an independent thing, but writing and reading work together, and this is where you really see the process. There were a number of questions too, interestingly, about the issue of creativity and ideas, which bring us to the other end of the process. Because if you feel that your students are not coming up with ideas for the text, or that they're trying to write a text, but just they have one idea at the beginning and they just run out of stuff, there is work that you can do at the pre-writing phase. If you start working more on areas like brainstorming and pre-drafting, which is where you're thinking, okay, what can I say on this? Can I Google ideas on this? Can I ask my colleagues? Can I have some debate about the topic before we go into it? And then just take notes and then start organizing your notes. And that begins to structure the text. If you start working on those pre-writing stages more, you will find that issues of creativity or lack of ideas or lack of content in the text begin to sort themselves out.
Yeah, it's adding steps before you ask for a final version, which I think is really important. And then the teachers can participate in those steps and keep giving feedback. One of the questions here, Pablo, everyone was really happy about the ideas you shared, like track changes. And they said, well, where do I find this? Is that difficult? I would like to highlight that on the handout, we put a link for you to see a tutorial on how to use track changes. So you can go to the handout, you can click on the link. There is a video in that tutorial, which I believe will help you start using track changes as a means of giving feedback online.
Absolutely. And someone also highlighted that there are things like proofing marks, which is something that is done on paper a lot and that professional proofreaders in publishing or journalism use, and which we teachers use when you start marking things with notes that you sometimes share with your students as preposition or tense or something missing. And those are extremely useful, maybe a little bit more work to implement on screen. So if you're trying to replicate your proofing marks on screen, you will find that you probably spend more time proofing, and this can save time. Also remember that this tool is available in Google Docs, definitely. And this is available in all other kinds of software. And sometimes you even have more tools available. In some word processors, you have the chance to record audio within as a comment. So instead of typing, you can just be recording yourself and doing a bit of the two ideas of screen capturing and feedback in the text combined. So explore your tool a little bit, find tutorials. There are many. You can Google, you can look them up on YouTube, the manuals, but there is always a way to do this.
Yeah, and we have shared many other resources as well to help you. And I think if you want to save time by going to all those places, go to Write and Improve and you have everything in one platform, right? Pablo, what else do we have for the attendees here in the webinar? We have many resources, right?
Oh, yes, we come bearing gifts. So some more resources. Remember that there are tons of resources available, but there are also tons of webinars coming up. Tomorrow, we have a webinar on writing at C1 and C2 level. There were questions here about things like academic writing. There were questions about essays. There were questions about lots of issues. Tomorrow, there's going to be a very specific focus on advanced writing. And here is the link to our webinar pages. You will see all of them there, and you will find ways to register. Next week, we will have assessing reading and listening online, so more of the skills coming in. Last week we had speaking, and that is already available on the YouTube channel. So I strongly recommend, if you haven't seen it, to go to YouTube and look that one up. And then on June 17, we're going to have listening at C1 and C2 level for more of those advanced learners. And actually, we're going to have more webinars happening on that week. So stay tuned, because we are doing a lot for you. We are doing now, one of the things that we mentioned, and that there were a couple of questions in the chat box about, was the Common European Framework. Now, the first link here, all of the things that you're looking at on screen are links in your handouts. So don't worry, don't try to click your screen right now. It's not going to work, but the handout includes everything. We have a webinar on applying the Common European Framework to your curriculum. And then we included links to the original Common European Framework document and the companion volume, which was published in 2018. If that is not enough, we have a Cambridge English and Cambridge University Press. We are working together during this time of disruption, and we are supporting teachers with lots of new resources like this webinar and all the others I mentioned, lots of lesson plans, lots of online material and all of that. Where can you access that? You can go to our cambridgeenglish.org supporting teachers page, which brings together all of those resources. You can look at our Facebook page, Cambridge English Teaching, and that is also going to include links to all of the things which are coming up.
And everything is on the handout. Mm-hmm.
And everything is on the handout. And one last thing is our free interactive support pack for teachers. Alberto, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, the support pack for teachers is an ebook, but it can also be a PDF that you can download. And it has the links to all the resources which are related to specific exams. So, and you have many more other resources here that you can access through this interactive support pack. It is, as it says, a pack of ideas and everything here is easily accessible and free. So you have lots and lots of resources for your online lessons or your face-to-face lessons if you are already teaching face-to-face.
And it is extremely handy as your kind of one-stop shop. Just remember that we have the supporting teachers page where everything is updated day by day. But this is a very good starting point because everything is organized by exams, by ages, by levels, and you have links to everything else. So
including our app for mobile phones. Yeah.
And you can see it on your mobiles, absolutely, which is so very important. Mm-hmm. Well, having said all of this, we have just one more thing to say to you, which is thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being with us today, for giving us your time. Whatever time of day it is for you, morning, afternoon, or evening, we value and treasure and appreciate the fact that you want to join us for this kind of activities.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone, for being so dedicated and commenting on the chat. It would be great to answer every single question that we got, but we don't have enough time to answer all the questions. But you have many webinars coming in the next weeks, and I'm sure the webinars will be addressing the questions that you have and that you have asked today, right? The other thing is there will be a video available, so you'll be able to watch this webinar again, and you'll be able to download the slides as well when the video is on YouTube. Okay, so stay tuned for that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And as always, it's a pleasure to deliver this together with my friend Alberto.
Thank you, Pablo. It was a great honor to do it twice this week. Wonderful.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of the day, everybody, and see you on the next one.
Yeah, see you. Thank you.